Thank you for joining us on this Monday evening. I'm Daniel Che for Arirang News. Let's start with the headlines. The Parliamentary, Legislative and Judiciary Committee is urging the government to conduct an independent investigation into a major bribery scandal sweeping Korean politics. The Justice Minister was in the hot seat and vowed to get to the bottom of that scandal. Today is the last day for South Korean firms with businesses in the inter-Korean complex in Kaesong to pay their North Korean workers. So far, there have been 2 rounds of talks without any progress. And a vessel packed full of migrants from Libya heading to the Mediterranean island of Malta sank over the weekend. Search and rescue operations are ongoing, but survivors say there are up to 950 people who were on board that ship. Let's start here in Korea. Korea's 2 main political parties are mulling the fate of embattled Prime Minister Lee Wan-koo, who is embroiled in a bribery scandal that's shaking up local politics. Some senior ruling Saenuri Party lawmakers say they are in favor of asking Lee to resign his post voluntarily, while party chief Kim Moo-sung says this isn't an option due to concerns about the potential vacuum in state affairs. President Park Geun-hye, who is in a 4-nation trip to South America, has said before leaving she would decide Lee's fate after she returns. On the other side of the aisle, the main opposition party said it will meet tomorrow on the question of whether to seek impeachment for the Prime Minister. Prime Minister Lee is suspected of accepting approximately $27,000 in bribes from Sung Woan-jong, a business tycoon who killed himself earlier this month. And staying on the bribery scandal story, the Parliamentary, Legislative and Judiciary Committee is calling on the government to launch an independent investigation into the matter. The committee lobbed questions at Justice Minister Hwang Kyo-wan on Monday, who vowed to get to the bottom of the scandal. Lawmakers from the ruling Saenuri Party focused on the fact that the late businessman was pardoned twice during the No Moo-hyun administration, implying there could be more politicians in the liberal camp who took bribes. Opposition party lawmakers said the investigation should first focus on the 8 people listed on that note. Meanwhile, prosecutors summoned accountants from Gyeongnam Enterprises, the late businessman's company, to track its lobby funds. Continuing her diplomatic tour of South America, President Park Geun-hye spent her 2nd day in Peru meeting Koreans who live in that country. She also had an opportunity to meet with Peruvian Kpop fans. Our Choi Yoo-sun reports from Lima.
Referring to the dozen or so Koreans who first settled in Peru 40 years ago, President Park Geun-hye praised the current 1,300-member Korean community for their hard work and endless efforts to succeed in Peruvian society. For the past 2 decades, many of the Koreans who live here have offered free medical services to Peru's underprivileged. President Park said she was proud of their volunteerism, as it not only enhances the reputation of the Korean community in Peru, but also that of Korea. The Korean leader then promised to continue to provide them with targeted support to help them live so far away from home. With Peruvians' increased interest in Korea, mainly due to an expansion of Korean pop culture, the president asked the residents to become Korea's civilian ambassadors and further promote Korean culture. It's estimated there are as many as 50,000 K-pop fans in Peru, and 15 of them got a chance to meet President Park and deliver personal gifts, including a llama doll and a silver brooch.
굉장히 세련된 문인데 아주 여러분들 생각하면서 잘 애용하겠습니다.
She thanked the fans and said their adoration for Korea will help the 2 countries become closer. President Park, who had just come from a visit to an archaeological museum, also praised the sophistication of the preservation techniques used for the artifacts. On Monday, President Park will discuss expanding bilateral cooperation to cover infrastructure, healthcare, and defense with Peruvian President Ollanta Humala. There's also speculation whether her latest visit will pave the way for Korea to export its combat aircraft to Peru. Choi Yoo-sun, Arirang News, Lima.
Moving our focus to national defense, South Korea's defense ministry has unveiled its blueprint for the next 5 years through 2020. More funds have been allocated to building 2 key air defense components aimed at deterring North Korean missile threats. Our Na Yeon-kyung has more.
$214 billion. That's about how much South Korea is planning to inject into its defense budget from 2016 to 2020 to beef up its military. This is according to South Korea's defense ministry, which unveiled its 5-year defense plan on Monday. $143 billion will be used for administrative expenses such as troop salary increases and strengthening the military as a whole, for example, by bolstering its cyber warfare capabilities. The rest will go toward enhancing the nation's defense capabilities.
We allocated the money based on the key components for deterring North Korea's provocations, kill chain, and Korea air missile defense, and on strengthening the military's capabilities in war.
Kill chain uses multi-purpose satellites, unmanned aircraft, and missiles to find and destroy targets, while KAMD utilizes Patriot interceptors and surface-to-air missiles. Roughly $8 billion will go toward building the two systems. That's more than $500 million more than what was allocated in the previous 5-year plan put forward last year. The budget increase comes as North Korea is believed to have made significant progress on miniaturizing a nuclear weapon and as its ballistic missiles continue to pose a threat. With the two systems, South Korea aims to gain the capability to find and destroy North Korea's mobile missiles launchers in 30 minutes. However, many experts point out that South Korea will continue to be under threat until the mid-2020s, as that's when the two systems are expected to be ready for deployment. They say until then, Seoul will need to bridge the gap in its missile defense capability. 나현경, Arirang News.
And with the wage row at the Kaesong Industrial Complex far from being settled, today was the last day for South Korean business owners to pay their North Korean workers. But the South Korean companies have just won a little more time. Our Hwang Sung-hee tells us more.
The good news for South Korean business owners is that the deadline for paying the North Korean workers has been extended to the end of this week. The wages were originally due on April 20th. But Pyongyang took into consideration the number of non-working days leading up to that date. Still, a representative for the South Korean firm said around 10 out of the 124 companies have already made the payments.
I'm aware that the payments were made in the same manner as before, with a promise to adjust the amount later on.
In February, the North unilaterally decided to raise the wages by more than 5% for its 53,000 workers at the Kaesong Industrial Complex. Despite 2 rounds of unsuccessful talks, Seoul's Unification Ministry reiterated that any decision must be reached through government-level dialogue.
We maintain the position that any revisions to the system, such as to labor regulations, must be resolved through inter-Korean talks through a mechanism like the Joint Management Committee.
Many South Korean companies are growing uneasy as the North has threatened to impose a late fee of 15% per month if they don't issue the wage payments on time. Experts say Monday's developments show Pyongyang's willingness to resolve the matter peacefully.
There could be 1 or 2 more rounds of inter-Korean talks at the Kaesong Industrial Complex. Once the joint military drills between South Korea and the U.S. end, I think the two sides will focus on resolving all issues through dialogue.
But if the situation deteriorates, experts say North Korea could increase the pressure by pulling out its workers from the complex and putting the blame on South Korea. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
In other stories, corporate debt is snowballing into a bigger concern for Korea. Figures released today show the country's high ratio of corporate debt to GDP ranks Korea 7th among 15 key advanced countries. With more on these numbers, here's our Kwon So-ah.
Public debt, household debt, and now corporate debt are raising concerns in Korea. A parliamentary report released Monday shows Korea's ratio of corporate debt to GDP in the second quarter of last year was the 7th highest among 15 key OECD member countries at 105%. Ireland was number 1 at almost 190%, followed by Sweden at more than 160% and Belgium at 130%. In comparison, the figure for Korea might not seem that high. But considering that corporate debt accounted for nearly 20 percentage points of the national debt to GDP increase of 45 percentage points since the global financial crisis in 2007, Korea stands in 3rd behind Ireland and Sweden. Data from Korea's central bank backs up the concerns about the rising debt. It shows the nation's corporate debt rose more than 18% from 2011 to 2014. More than 80% of that debt was held by private companies. However, analysts say this does not necessarily mean that Korean firms need to reduce their debt.
Of course, it's safe to have a low amount of debt, but the fact that developed countries are at the top of the list shows there are other factors to consider, as a low level of debt could also mean that a company is not investing enough.
Still, New Politics Alliance for Democracy lawmaker Oh Jae-se, who requested the recent data, says mounting government debt is having a negative impact on the private sector, adding that a debt-centered management of the economy will have serious effects on future development. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
On a brighter note, let's talk shopping now. More than 1 million people in Korea are now buying things directly on foreign websites, and most of them are women in their 30s shopping smart. On Monday, the Korea Customs Service reported on the number of Koreans who have a customs ID, which is required for those who want to make a direct purchase from overseas. Women accounted for nearly 60% of all registered shoppers, and the majority are in their 30s. The data also showed that most people spent around $100 to $300 per transaction. The most popular items are health products like vitamins, followed by food, clothing, and cosmetics. Shifting gears to a different story now, it's being dubbed the worst migrant ship disaster ever. A tiny boat carrying what's thought to be at least 700 people capsized somewhere between the Libyan coast and the Italian island of Lampedusa. Pope Francis has called on the international community to act decisively and promptly to prevent a similar incident from ever happening again. Our Sung Woan-jong has more.
It was late Saturday night local time when a vessel packed full of migrants sank 100 kilometers off the Libyan coast while heading to the Mediterranean island of Malta. The precise death toll remains unknown, but survivors say anywhere between 700 to 950 people were estimated to have been on board. The Italian Coast Guard says a major search and rescue operation is ongoing, but only 50 people have been pulled from the water alive.
It's a possibility that we'll get up to something close to 450 deaths just this week, in which has been an extraordinary period of traffic from North Africa and specifically Libya to the Italian waters.
Local media presumes the accident occurred when the 20-meter-long vessel, far exceeding its weight capacity, tilted to one side when those on board moved to the edge as they saw a large merchant ship approaching the boat. This latest sinking follows a string of similar disasters in recent years. Last week, 400 migrants were presumed to have drowned when a boat attempting to reach Italy capsized off Libya. A few days later, 20 migrants were rescued when they were found drifting in the Mediterranean Sea. Despite the obvious dangers, more and more migrants are opting to attempt a treacherous journey to escape from war and persecution and seek a better life in Europe. The disaster has prompted European officials and Pope Francis to call for urgent action to cope with the rapidly mounting numbers of desperate people making journeys across the Mediterranean Sea. Sung Woan-jong, Arirang News.
We now zoom in on possible changes in local education system. Korea's Education Ministry has announced that it will push for legislation to help young students find their career path. The ministry said Monday that it will propose revised legislation to create a so-called free learning semester. The semester would give students opportunities to develop their talents through discussions, field studies, and hands-on experiences, in addition to regular lessons on major subjects. If the revision passes, it will first be implemented in 70% of all junior high schools this year. Air pollution in Korea has been a serious issue in the nation. A recent study shows that a significant number of people have died because of related diseases. However, the bigger problem is the prediction about how many more could die if the issue isn't addressed. Our Connie Kim reports.
The fine dust that's been blurring the Seoul skyline is becoming increasingly hazardous and deadly to residents in the region. A study published in the Korean Journal of Occupational and Environmental Medicine on Monday says that more than 15,000 adults in Seoul and the surrounding Gyeonggi-do province died earlier than their life expectancy in 2010 because of diseases linked to air pollution, with fine dust being the main culprit. Now that's nearly 16% of the total number of adults who died during the same period. Fine dust is made up of particles that are less than 10 micrometers in diameter, or about 1/7 the width of a human hair. Im Jong-han, one of the co-authors of the study, said the most common diseases linked to air pollution are lung cancer, cardiovascular disease, and chronic respiratory disease. What's even more concerning is the study's prediction that more than 25,000 people could die from air pollution-linked diseases in 2024 if no steps are taken to curb it.
Up to 40 to 50% of the dust drifting into Korea comes from overseas, so the Korean government's efforts to address the problem will not be enough. Bilateral cooperation with China, the main contributor to Korea's air pollution problem, will be needed to solve the issue.
Korea has already taken steps to address the issue. Last year, during a trilateral environmental ministers meeting between Korea, China, and Japan, the ministers talked about ways to work together to tackle various environmental issues, with improving air quality topping the list. But what's really important, experts say, is for China to develop clean energy sources to use in place of coal. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
That's all from me at this hour, but I'll be back with Hwang Ji-hye for Primetime News at 10 p.m. Korea time. Do join us then. For now, thank you for watching.